Hello, Linda. Thank you very much for joining me and joining what is now a growing set of global perspectives around PE. I've been fascinated with what's going on in Scotland for a number of years now. I'm quite envious of the Curriculum for Excellence, heard almost nothing but great things about it. And so I thought it was a nice opportunity for us to connect again and have a quick conversation about what that's was looking like, what it is looking like right now as we sit here in lockdown, and then what it may look like going forwards, or perhaps even what your hopes are for a brighter future for PE going forward. So if you could perhaps, if for people that don't know you, introduce yourself briefly, that'd be amazing.
Hi, I'm Linda McLean. I'm a PE teacher to trade. I taught for 37 years and in June 2018 took the chance to move to SQA, the Scottish Examining Body, and I've been working as a subject implementation manager for the last 18 months. I taught in a reasonably sized, an 850 school in a local authority, an education local authority, and was principal teacher for a long time of a very, very successful PE department, running courses from first year all the way through to 18-year-olds.
So you get it.
I hope, well, yes, and I've never lost my passion for it. Even in my job now, although I'm much more in a kind of development post, I still have contacts. I still go back into schools and deliver some lessons and keep my hand in. I've kept my registration so that, you know, if I ever wanted to, I could go back and do that. And I'm principal assessor for higher PE, which means I work with a team of 100 or so markers each year, marking the higher.
And the higher that sat for your 16-year-olds, is that right?
It would depend. 17 probably in our senior phase, which is around 17, 18-year-old, just before you leave school potentially.
Okay, yeah. Well, we'll digress for a second then. So it's an interesting time for that role, I should imagine, right now, with those students not sitting their exam this summer. What does that look like? How are you guys navigating that?
There's been a very good, straightforward policy put together, which mimics or mirrors a lot of the work that's been doing elsewhere around the world, where teacher professional judgment is going to be the basis for which certification is going to happen this year. And there's been very clear guidelines put out, with the deadline being next week, for teachers to use the evidence that they have to make judgments about what kids should get. And there's a ranking where you try to order the kids' achievements and almost kind of have a real clear picture of what attainment should have looked like in your centre for your subject. And we're awaiting, Scottish Government have a group called the Education Recovery Group, which is reporting next Thursday on the 28th of May. And they are going to make a list of recommendations about what education in its entirety will look like in this phased return. We've got a 4-point phase of plans that are going to be carried out over the next few months. I mean, there's no time scale. They've just said there will be 4 phases. And this education recovery group will feed into that and will tell teachers exactly what can and what can't be done.
That's interesting. And so again, going back to the grading part of that I think, like you say, elsewhere around the world, and certainly in England, we're doing the same thing. And that ranking is really important as they start to standardise between schools. And from what I've read, the only, I'm almost saying hallelujah, it's really nice to be putting something back in the hands of the professional judgment of teachers. The only potential hole that I can see is if a school's been on a downward trajectory or it's been struggling, but they've had, significant change in the quality of education that's going on in that school in perhaps the last 18 months. Those students may well be missing out because of what the history graph says about students in that school. Is that a similar concern in Scotland, or?
I'm not worried about that, in that all the judgments that we'll make will be based on evidence that we have. So if there was such a trend, then you would surely have evidence to show that actually this year it was something, you know, it was actually something that was not going to be along the similar lines for previous years. And I do believe the professionalism that we have, and we've been given, again, this has been reinforced through this estimates. You know, teachers are good at knowing their kids. They know their kids, they know what they've done, they know what they're capable of, they know what they would have done. And so, you know, it's a system where I don't think anyone's going to end up struggling or you know, I haven't heard many people complaining about it.
Okay, brilliant.
I haven't heard many people unhappy.
And I guess the one last question I have on that is, I'm just interested to know what sort of proportion of your students take their higher in PE. So we have this, I think, conflict in England at the moment. I love examined PE courses and vocational sport courses for the students that it's right for, but it's not right for everyone. And I think sometimes those accountability measures are being monopolizing the thought processes and the curriculum that the rest of the school are getting. And I did some stats a few years ago, but probably 1 in 8 students at a qualification in PE. What does that number look like for you?
I don't know what the proportion would be, but I know the numbers. There's about 18,000 kids who do National 5 PE. So that's a big number.
Higher.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's about 10,000, nearly 11,000 do higher PE. So in my school, PE would be one of the big hitters. PE would be the subject where most kids did. In fact, in our school, there was no core physical education at the middle stage. Every single pupil did National 5 PE. Okay. So all 160 of our kids went through certificated PE. And then we didn't have the whole cohort carry forward, but we did have probably maybe about a third of that would carry forward into higher.
Yeah, and those conversion numbers are good, aren't they? That if you looked at GCSE to A level in this country, it would be nothing like that. Right. That number. And one of the things that we got very good at was finding breadth in the curriculum. It's a bit what you said about certificated PE. And we had lots of kids who would come back in the senior phase just after, when they were 16 going on 17. They'd achieved their National 5 PE. They'd come back in 5th year and do their higher PE, and then they would come back in 6th year and say, right, I want to do something else in PE. So we had introduced a whole range of different awards and qualifications that kids could do from SQA. So we had higher sports development, which was a NPA, a National Progression Awards, but it was at the same level as higher PE. So some kids would come back into the senior phase, into their 6th year, for example, and maybe do higher sports development. They would pick up a PDA, which is a Professional Development Award in football refereeing. Oh, wow. So they're really starting to specialise and see, is this the future for me? Or if not, at least they've dipped their toe and they can change avenue.
And lots of schools are doing that. Lots of schools are finding other things other than the standard kind of PE qualification, because kids love PE, love sport, love the relationships that they have with the PE department. They want to be around the PE department, most of them, and they talk about spending their 6th year in their last year in the PE department, volunteering, helping kids in younger classes, picking up these additional qualifications. So it's that's one of the things I think that the COVID, the lockdown has really totally exemplified for me, is how the relationship is what's at the heart of teaching, and the engagement levels of kids coming online and doing the lessons online. It obviously isn't the same as, you know, going to school and seeing people and being around people and all these kind of social aspects. So I'm hopeful about what's going to happen going forwards. I know we're going to get to that later, but I'm really hopeful of what PE can do.
Me too. And I also know that you have a very strong professional body, SATP, in terms of the PE profession. You're
Yeah,
quite, um, well, a lot of them trained in one of only two institutions.
Scotland, yeah. Hmm.
And so
Yeah,
therefore there is this almost extended family feel about
most definitely.
the profession,
Most
which
definitely.
again, so some of that collaboration that I'm hopeful tech has managed to break down some barriers and get some of us happier with
Yeah.
some of this interaction and sharing of resources. And it's really blossomed over the last few years, but that's been something I should imagine you guys have done well for some time.
Yeah, and we have a very strong lead from Education Scotland. We've got a couple of PE teachers who actually have full responsibility for health and well-being. So they're driving the agenda from the very top, and there's good collaborative work going on around the country as a result of these relationships that PE teachers have with each other. And there really is a real, I think PE is in a strong place in Scotland. It's one of the three, or it's included within health and well-being, which is one of the three main areas of the curriculum for excellence. And so PE really has quite a unique place in that there is a 2-hour entitlement, or 2-period entitlement for all kids from age 3 right through till 18. And it's actually reported on here, Will. So at the end of the year, certainly when I was working, we had to report how many hours our kids did at each stage in their curriculum, and that was reported back to Scottish Government, so that they then report on the targets for that entitlement being achieved. So it's a very strong position.
Yeah, almost a non-negotiable, isn't it, for senior leaders in schools?
Yeah, yeah, it's sometimes quite difficult to manage. For example, in our school, we didn't get the 2 hours entitlement in 6th year, in the very final year, but we had so many extracurricular programs, so many other courses that 6th year pupils were involved in, that the activity levels were probably achieved without enforcing that entitlement rule. So it is an enviable position, I think, in that it's been given such status in the country, but then that's because we have such health issues, and the preventative and the kind of health agenda that drives a lot of things around education, as you know, is we've been given the kind of mantle almost to take that forward and try and change the culture.
Yeah, it's been put there for good reason. I had a really good conversation with Dr. Dean Dudley about 9 hours ago, actually, and he said something that I've either not heard it or I've not heard it for a while. That physical literacy was the first literacy, and actually we learnt to walk and move and interact with our environment before we learnt to write and it again puts into perspective, doesn't it, how important, and as you just described there, I guess literacy and numeracy trump in most places, but it's really nice that for you that movement and well-being and PE sits as the third strand.
And that's why I feel confident that going forwards, there'll be things that PE can really contribute to help kids make that transition. And it's not just kids coming from primary school into secondary school. Making the transition going back to school now is going to be crucial. And I think PE has got a huge role to play in that regard, in that systems and activities and routines and even just contact with the staff that they know well is going to be something that will make that transition back much less traumatic, much more efficient, speed up the process of kids being able to interact with each other safely and without fear.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's critical. We'll come back to that later in the call, actually. But, again, digging a bit deeper on curriculum for excellence, I know you've got a beautiful diagram, and I know you've done an awful lot of work on your benchmarks. For people that haven't, to whet their appetite to go and take more of a look, talk me through what that captures.
So Education Scotland have produced a broad general education And it's a continuous progressive programme, probably from the age of 3. So when kids go into nursery school, there are physical education experiences and outcomes that they have to have the chance to encounter, experience, and they have significant aspects of learning attached to these outcomes. These significant aspects of learning then are devolved even further, in that we now have benchmarks against which we can see kids' progress towards achieving the different levels that are associated with this broad general. And the benchmarks are very clear. They are internationally benchmarked. So a lot of the people you've been talking about, some of their work will have been some of the kind of research and background upon which these benchmarks have been arrived at. So schools now, when a kid comes into first year in my school, I'll know what level they're working at. I'll know what their next steps are. And then I can take that forward for the next 3 years in secondary school.
Yeah.
And at each stage, there are clear guidelines as to what a third level performer should be able to do in one of the 4 areas. So we've got physical skills, physical competencies, I beg your pardon, which are basically all of the kind of things about gross and fine motor movement, all of these areas. We've got physical fitness, which targets the aspects of fitness. We've got personal qualities, which are all about kind of respect, tolerance, motivation, resilience, all of these things. And we've got cognitive skills, which are the kind of mental aspects about decision making, cue perception, all of these kind of almost the fundamentals to being able to move effectively in any kind of.
Presumably the sort of analysis of performance and that sort of stuff would fit in your cognitive skills as well.
Yeah.
What about the sort of the understanding, you mentioned earlier about the health inequalities, so the understanding of the benefits to physical, social, emotional well-being, where does that fit? Does it tie into a number of them, or does
it probably ties in right across all of them? The kind of the main areas that the context that we're trying to deliver through is about movement skills. We're trying to include areas about cooperation, even competing, as well as evaluation and analysis, so that you're able to see what you can do, and more importantly, what you should know, what you need to do in order to be able to make progress. And that's one of the things that when our inspections are happening in schools, inspectors will ask kids, so what do you need to do to get better? And they're very interested in kids' take on, do they really understand where they're at and what they need to do next? So the profession really, it does have a good, the health related benefits. I guess there's an inherent expectation that at all points kids should see the relevance of it. And nothing is, you don't learn anything if it's irrelevant to you. You might remember it, but you'll not really understand it. So at all stages, teachers are trying to reinforce the importance of why we're doing what we're doing in all these 4 contexts, in the significant aspects of learning. We're trying to say, if you do this, this means that you'll be able to, and here's what you need to do in order to be able to do that. It's a learning conversation that teachers are encouraged to have regularly with kids, so that kids are going through that process all the time of checking that they know what they're doing, and reaffirming and confirming with the teacher that actually, yeah, I'm on the right lines, I know what I'm doing next, I know what I need to do.
And they feel like they own their competences, if you like, and they know where their strengths lie, and perhaps they can find ways to play on that, but they also know where their gaps and their voids are, that they've got to focus to pull that in line with the rest.
That's a big focus for Curriculum for Excellence, about taking responsibility for your own learner, for your own learning. You can really only do that if you see the relevance of it. If you're convinced by it and you're on board and engaged, then you will take responsibility for doing the next thing. And that's difficult in terms of equity in Scotland, that we have a a huge issue about the gap between the most and the least able, and there's been a lot of work done to try and reduce that gap, the attainment gap they call it, so that there should be no barriers for any kids. That, you know, we have to find what it is, what the key is for each and every child to try and get them to engage, and the basis of that is really understanding the relevance of it.
Trying to think, there's so many questions I've got for you. When we last spoke, it sounded like you've been doing some really interesting interviews with a group of teachers. I'm just wondering, I'm sure you can't share yet what's come from that, but some of the early insight you're getting from that?
SQ are carrying out a mid-term review of the content of courses just now, so we're looking at how the courses match up with the broad general education that kids are experiencing in their first to third year in secondary. And what we're trying to make sure is that the knowledge and the skills and the attributes that they develop in that area, we then use those as a springboard to take forward into the senior phase. And we're trying to make sure just now, and the discussions we're having with teachers are so interesting, because people are finding really inventive and creative ways to try and make the connections between the phases. And I guess the good thing about the review that we're carrying out is that we're trying to contact every single local authority and get views from everyone. But it's early. The data's coming in, it's not finished, and there's still more to do, so I'll have more to share at another point in time about it.
But the nice thing is, you know, you're very much running that cycle, aren't you? You're listening to the profession, and they have the empowerment, if you like, to be creative and to come up with new ways of tackling and dealing with things, and then you can take that back into the system to make it better for everyone.
Yeah, and that's the point of it, because again, it's the same with kids. If they don't see the relevance of what they're doing, they're not going to engage. If teachers aren't involved in what they're being asked to deliver, if they don't think it's the right thing, if they think it can be improved, then, you know, their engagement levels in trying to deliver it creatively are going to be reduced if it's not something they feel is valid or you know, interesting enough.
So on that then, it feels to me like the benchmarks you have would be really helpful, but do you get any pushback from the profession that it's a lot, it's too much, it's a lot of structure?
Yeah, as a teacher I always felt, heck, there's a lot. I think there's 90 of them in total, think measurements against which, but because you can choose which of them are most relevant for your learners at this stage. It could be kids will come with a good background of understanding what tolerance is all about, and you might not need to deliver very much associated with that in your courses. The benchmarks, there's a lot of them, but actually it gives such a clear framework from age 3 up to age 18 that actually I think most people have really appreciated the fact that there's clear standards against which they should be looking to see what kids' progress is. And they're not, it's 3 to 18. So a kid might take until it's in, they're in 5th year until they achieve, but that's okay. And as long as we've got the evidence of the progress that they've made, even slow progress is progress, and that's fine.
And presumably, because the benchmarks are nice and clear, and you've got confidence in teachers' ability to use it, it means if a student, you know, whether they're coming from primary and joining me at secondary, or they're moving from class to class, that teacher has some really helpful intelligence to know, where do I need to prioritise learning for this child?
Yeah, I guess that would be the only criticism that I don't even know if it's a criticism. The only concern that I would have is we don't get a lot of information from our primary colleagues about levels that kids achieve in every single subject. Okay. So the first year, when kids come into first year, you're quite often doing a little bit of of assessment, a formative assessment, to try and work out and to actually clarify where they're at, so that you know where they're going next.
Do you think a part of that is just a data transfer challenge, and perhaps as tech continues to get better, we'll overcome that, or is it more fundamental?
We don't have primary specialists in PE specialists in primary as well, so we're quite often, it's the primary teacher coming in to deliver a PE lesson who's being asked to report and monitor concepts that they've had, not huge. So I think there's a bit of that in that. I don't know how primary teachers do their job. It's a huge job that they do, delivering all these different curricula. But I think there's part of that, but I also think it's part of just information overload. How much information can you actually write down, record and forward? So, and I do still believe that even if you get information about where that person thinks they're at, there's still a little bit of you going back and revisiting it and not checking judgments, but almost confirming that that's where you think they're at too. So it's quite a healthy process in that you're working in tandem with your colleagues. In secondary schools, we tend to take your same class forward into the next year, so you get to know them really well, and then you might have them again in third year, and then you might have them in fourth year, and then you might take them through higher. So you get to know kids really well in our school, in that the classes are, we try to standardise the number of teachers that kids will face within a year, and then try and make connections with teachers in the coming years, so that learning and the styles and kids' abilities and preferences are all already known by the teacher.
And relationships are everything, aren't they? You've already touched on the creativity of your teachers, so that never have they needed to be more creative than right now. What does schooling look like for you as we talk?
In PE just now, people are really relying on technology. So there's a lot of Google Classrooms set up. Kids are getting daily, weekly fitness challenges, skills challenges. Even they're being asked to look out for different things when they're out exercising. But in the primary school, they're getting kind of daily tasks as well, but because of the kind of need for parental involvement in that, they've got to be very careful, because it's dependent on parents being able to support their kids do whatever it is they're asking them to do. We can't always kind of expect them to be independent. So up here in Scotland just now, people are putting lessons out on Google Classrooms. They're meeting their classes online. They're delivering.
Seeing them.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
So they're using Glow, and it's the national kind of program. They're using Microsoft Teams, I think, too, and they are meeting their kids. They're teaching a lesson. They've put resources on Google Classrooms or on they have other kind of, I'll not mention the names of them, but they have other packages where work can be put up in advance. Kids pick it up, and then the teacher goes through it with them. And people are being incredibly inventive, putting video clips in, talking, commentating over the top of videos. And for me, I just think it's such an amazing adaptation of what we've been used to doing, which of course is you go out, you know what your intentions are, your lesson intentions are, but you go out and you modify it as you go along. But here we've gone into a new season where you're having to kind of anticipate and predict what you need to plan, and you're looking at kids on screen sometimes switching their camera off, and you're wondering, are they listening, have they gone, are they doing something else, and yet we're still determined that we're going to push through and get kids good experiences.
And how long's that been going on for you now? How long have children been?
Pretty much right away. Certainly in our school, their staff were contacting kids early on and saying, you've not been online. And contacting parents.
What, sort of 2 months worth of that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and now in Scotland, most schools will have changed timetables, so kids will have started their new year. They start at the beginning of June, because
Yeah.
it was a bit of a kind of period of time where there wasn't too much learning going on, and so there was a real focus on let's make use of that.
Yeah.
So most kids have started on their new courses, and the word that I'm getting is that kids are engaging a lot of the time with the teachers, and they're enjoying that interaction again. I don't know how long we can sustain that, though. I'm really hopeful that, you know, we'll be going back to some. We're talking about blended learning here in Scotland after summer holidays. Yeah.
And
So,
because your summer holiday, because you're dealing with things a little bit differently to how we are here in England, we're talking about phased return to schools from the 1st of June. And I know your summer holidays a bit earlier than ours as well, but your kids are off school until after the summer, are they? Or
well, I'm not sure if that's been formally announced. I think that there's an expectation that the group next week will be saying that some kids, the transition from primary 7 into high school, that some sort of transition arrangements might be able to be carried out. The same for kids starting school that are meant to be starting school in August, that maybe some sort of transition from nursery to primary could be facilitated. But again, it's all up in the air. Nothing clear has been published yet as to how that's going to happen. There's such a pressure, I guess, to make the decisions, but then when you think about the complexity of what's involved, I guess they're trying to be cautious, putting things in place that are undeliverable.
And so typically your school year starts again towards the end of August, is that right?
But I think they announced yesterday it would be the 11th of August.
Okay.
So again,
no, go on.
Around Scotland, different education authorities have different dates, and it depends on different holidays, local holidays that the different authorities have. So that's round about the time that schools would be going back.
And what do you anticipate PE looking like in that whole new world?
Well, at the moment, with the social distancing, I think PE teachers are going to have to be even more creative. But again, I'm hopeful that that's something that they can really help with. Yesterday, our First Minister announced that tennis activities like tennis and golf and bowls, in fact, would all be something that could be started up again fairly quickly.
So we'll see more Andy Murrays, will we?
Yes. So I think in terms of PE going forwards, we'll need to be cautious about, or some things will need to be modified. So in Scotland, we had, in our school, we always insisted everyone changed for PE, no matter whether you were injured or not, you still got changed. And that was a very successful policy, and it led to great accolades for the department, in as much as kids eventually understood why we got them changed when they were feeling rubbish. They got it. So we might need to concede and surrender this policy that we've had, that you always have to get changed for PE before and after.
Or go to school in PE kit on PE days.
Yeah. Or go home at the end of the day after you've had PE.
Yeah.
So because changing rooms will be a big issue. I don't know what it's like down with you, but we can quite often have 60 or 70 people in the one big changing room at the one time, and there would be no possibility of social distancing in those settings. And things, again, I was thinking about the types of lessons we would deliver. The lessons would be, we'd need to change the focus of our lessons, or be wider in terms of introducing problem solving, looking at different ways of strategies that we could put in place, because I think we are going to be limited in the number of activities that we're going to do, and we certainly don't want kids to get bored of doing table tennis or badminton or bowls or whatever it is, or dance, gymnastics, all these individual activities. And again, I'm really hopeful that it'll encourage us to go outdoors more. Yeah. Lots of schools have got really good outdoor facilities, and although you know, I would not like to see a return to just kids going out and working on fitness work, but we could be very creative with the activities that we do and the types of modifications and games and rules that we have in these games to try and limit contact and try and slow down any kind of social distancing rules to be broken consistently.
And I guess there's an opportunity for some of the sort of the sport ed or the gamification of some of that fitness challenge or outdoor ed challenge stuff. Again, it just relies on a lot of creativity and hopefully the profession coming together and sharing what's working, what's not, and swapping ideas.
Yeah, but there's no better people than PE teachers to do that, Will. PE teachers are the masters of creativity, I think, in teaching and learning, because you are dealing with 33 kids in Scotland in a class in first to third year, and you're watching all of them and you're trying to manage and make sure that learning is happening all of the time. You know, it's if a kid is sitting looking, so I think PE teachers can really lead the way in this, and the types of personality that these people have, the types of relationships that they've got with their kids, I think will be something that senior management will want to draw on to try and keep kids engaged. I can think of nothing worse than kids coming to school and sitting in a classroom with tape or a chalk line round their desk that they're not. These boundaries and barriers that kids are going to experience in so many parts of school after lockdown is something that PE has to try and find ways round. And I've got no doubt that we'll be able to do that. We'll be able to find activities and experiences kids will just inherently love.
Yeah, I was talking earlier in the week, and I can't remember where it was, somewhere in Europe, they've made that exception around social distancing for PE. And obviously they're not playing contact sports, but they've gone, you know what? This is the absolute essence of this subject and of human flourishing. So the risk is worth it in this scenario to try and enrich and to give some of that normality back, I suppose.
I mean, the concern I have about that is parents. I think parents might be fearful, but again, I'd be drawing on the experiences parents have had trying to homeschool their kids over the last 3 months, and that they've seen for themselves the real difficulty they have of keeping kids engaged in a task, sitting still for any length of time. And you and I both know the benefits of physical activity and what it does in terms of learning and attainment and social skills. All PE teachers are convinced by the need for physical education, not just physical activity, but physical education. And that's why we can't just have kids going back, looking at someone and copying someone. We've got to build back in that opportunity for them to feel it, to experience it, to see it, to contribute to it, to plan it, to change it, these are the kind of things that PE is uniquely able to do compared to any other subject. And actually, if schools get that right, I think that the transition after post-lockdown will be much more successful. I watched a bit on Question Time last night. I don't know if you saw it, and there was a psychologist just talking about the damage that this lockdown has done to kids' confidence, to their self-esteem. And I was thinking, let me in there. Let me just tell them what we need to do. We need to get kids back together, show them how they can do that, strip away that fear and that anxiety that they have about being around other people now, and actually start building. And PE can be the cornerstone of all of that.
Yeah, I was listening to a YST podcast actually, and listening to a head teacher from down in London, talking about how she'd just spoken to a parent who neither her or her children had left their flat since lockdown because they're on the 4th floor, and as you say, just too fearful to get on the corridors and get out the block of flats. So again, whilst I'm very lucky, I live near the river, and I've been, if anything, upping my bouts of vitamin D, and it's been good for my work. But yeah, who knows how many students that's become the world for them, and how we strip back the fear, but also build back the confidence in the movement and the interactions with others and all the rest of it. So it sounds a bit like you have quite a bit of confidence in the secondary PE profession, but we were talking earlier about, you know, the generalists at primary and actually how fundamental their role is.
Well, the Education Scotland are looking at that just now. Will, I've been very blessed to be part of a group that's looking at producing resources for primary schools. In fact, there's a webinar on the 20th. I'll send you the link to it, Will. I know you'll edit this bit out. And it's going to be about how can we be proactive and make sure that physical education in the primary and in the secondary happens, because more than ever, parents in primary are needing convinced and reassured that actually the experiences schools are going to set up are not going to cause further damage, or they're not going to put their kids at risk. And there's a fair amount of work to be done with parents on that, and Education Scotland are really leading the way on it, I believe, here in Scotland. The Suzanne Hargraves and Gillian Anderson, the two at the head of health and wellbeing here, are really being proactive in pulling together resources that schools can use as backup, not to send parents away to do with their kids, but can be done in school.
Yeah, I guess it's that recognising that, yes, they have a role around guidance and guidelines, and you know, we're learning every day, aren't we, as the scientists and the experts and all the rest of it, but they're going that one step further and going, they've got to be giving practical solutions as well.
Yeah, because actually a non-PE specialist in the primary has the broad general education and the benchmarks against which they'll be thinking they have to measure kids, but how they arrive at that with the limited resources and the restrictions that are in place will be very difficult. And that's what Education Scotland are trying to do. They're trying to say, hang on, here, if you do this, this is going to really help kids, and it will satisfy these different significant aspects of learning that kids should still be getting the chance to develop or experience.
Yeah, okay, brilliant. Conscious of time, we could talk on all day, but I'm just wondering if, yeah, we've covered an awful lot there. I'm just wondering if there's anything else that you perhaps were hoping to discuss, or maybe anything that you're really hoping for the future of PE.
I think I've said everything that I wanted. I guess I wanted to reaffirm the fact that, you know, the Joe Wicks video, that people really were very, I don't know what the uptake is now, I don't know how many hits he's still getting, but at the beginning everybody seemed to be talking about it. I'm not hearing so many people talking about it now, and I guess what I'm so passionate about is the role of the PE teacher in learning and physical education. And out of this, I think I feel in a stronger position to say that teachers, PE teachers, because I'm totally biased, are at the heart of everything that happens in a school. And I think the learning by watching model that seemed to be happening at the beginning of the lockdown, I'm fairly glad to say that actually, as we've moved forward, we've seen that that's not really learning, that's not really a kind of process that we want to sustain forever.
I guess it was a quick fix to occupy and to fulfill a bit of that movement need, but as you've alluded to, you know, the fact that your teachers are having these touch points and the social interaction with their students, the relationship, it's the personalized approach, and that's where education comes from, is a connection, and you can't do that at scale. You know, even 1 to 33 is tough, but 1 to whatever Joe Wicks was doing, 20 million, just
yeah, and he's got his £1 million book deal out of it too. Good on him.
And you know what? We could sit here and be critical. I think Joe Wicks and for me here in England, Boris and the NHS have done some wonderful things for raising the profile of daily physical activity and prioritising it over so many other aspects of everyday life. However, that does not equate to physical education. So we've now got to, as custodians of the subject, we've got to pick up the mantle and go, right, well, you've filled a void and you've proven how important the moving is. Now I'm going to take that to the next level of the 90 benchmarks and the everything else we develop in a person through it.
Yeah. And if that's the only good thing that comes out of it, in terms of kids getting the benefit now of being involved in physical education and learning and using it for so many other things other than getting their qualification, which is worthwhile, but actually look at what it can do for your learning and literacy and numeracy. Look at the benefits of having that type of energy level in your body as a result of having done some physical education, and kids will have experienced it for themselves,
Absolutely. Linda, thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure.